As a patient or an employee, what's the most insane thing you've seen or experienced in a hospital? I was in the hospital for an infection in the bones of my foot. I take medication for a heart condition and diabetes. Nurse came in one evening to give me my medication. She brings me strange-looking pills. I ask her what they are. She tells me 2 medications I've never heard of. I tell her she might have mixed up my medication with someone else's. She says no. She's sure. Take the pills. I refuse. I ask for the head nurse for the floor or a doctor. Head nurse comes in. I ask her what medication I'm supposed to be receiving. She checks my chart, confirms what I'm supposed to be taking. I ask her to ask the original nurse what medication she has in her hand. The nurses leave the room and a third nurse comes back in with the right pills. Head nurse comes back in and tells me that the original nurse will no longer be responsible for my care. The next day, the nurse coordinator comes in with a digital audio recorder and notepad to go over all the details of what happened the night before. From what I learned later, this wasn't the first incident with this nurse giving out the wrong medications. She had done it to a couple of other patients and I heard she had been suspended pending an investigation. Don't know what happened because nobody ever contacted me after that. Our nurse had an old lady come in by ambulance. Near death. She was a DNR. So we weren't going to do much for her. She didn't have any family that we could find. The hospital was full, so we had to keep her in the for the night. Again, she was near death. When you've seen enough people die, there's no mistaking it, and she was almost there. Barely responsive, pale, cool, breaths were really irregular. Heart rate was up and down, too. We just turned the lights down and kept an eye on her monitor. Basically waiting for her to die. About an hour later, she's standing at the door of her room. She'd gotten up and put on all her clothes. We were all like, WTF? One of the nurses went to check on her, and she said she was hungry. Not knowing really what to make of things, we got her a chair, a bedside table, and went to the cafeteria and got her a tray of food. Lady sat there, ate all her food, talked with the staff a little. After about an hour, she told her nurse that she was tired and wanted to lie back down. We helped her back into bed, and within 30 minutes she was dead. Not exactly paranormal, but in 22 years in busy-ass inner city it's the weirdest thing I've seen. I was a patient. There was an elderly man in the bed next to me waiting to be transferred to a nursing home. The nursing staff treated him as though he was a difficult patient when, in reality, he was just too frail to do things for himself. Anyway, one day, the nurse refused to help him go to the bathroom as she said he was just being lazy. I could not help as I was bedridden myself at the time. He took a fall and hit his head on the floor. The male nurse just threw him back onto the bed. His family arrived, and I heard them asking the female nurse who refused to help him why their father was so groggy. The nurse lied, saying nothing had happened, and he was fine. I called the man's daughter over to my bed and told her the whole story. Needless to say, the shit hit the fan. While in the emergency room for an asthma attack as a child, 2 teenage boys were brought in by ambulance. They had been huffing silver paint. At first, I thought it was funny because they looked stupid with the paint on their faces. Then my mom started crying hard. The older of the 2 was DOA, and the younger was screaming, "I can't believe I'm going to die," over and over. I can still hear his voice in my head 35 years later. Even worse is their parents' sobs when they showed a little later. It turned out they were brothers. Fucking awful. I'm a third-party contract cleaner at my local hospital. We basically clean all the public spaces and non-patient areas. The morgue falls under us. Well, like many morgue, we have a walk-in freezer, fridge. Well, one morning, as a supervisor was walking past, There happened to be water on the floor coming out of the morgue. It turns out a cooling pipe was leaking pretty bad. So we call the maintenance and repair people and get the water shut off to that area. There was about 2 inches of water throughout. So we cleaned that up. And because the cooling pipe broke, we had to open the fridge and transfer the bodies to the second spare fridge away from the broken pipes so the funeral people could come and pick them up without going around ladders and construction. We crack open the door to the watertight fridge. And because it was watertight, we didn't know that a second pipe had also broken. Turned out the fridge had flooded as well. Have you ever seen a video of someone cutting a pool and the water running out, as well as everything that was in the pool? Well, the water was so high that the bodies were floating. And we had that sliced pool effect as soon as that seal was broken and the door was unlocked. So not only was 5 feet of water rushing out of the fridge into the morgue and into the hallway, but whatever was floating in that water did as well. There were sheets and gowned bodies that ended up all over the floor. And one actually made it into the hallway. The basement was flooded once again. And that was one hell of a cleanup. Whenever someone says the word floaters to me, that's all I can think of. This happened a few years back before COVID. I almost quit that day. Quite a few things. First, patient in severe alcohol withdrawal busted out of 4-point locked restraints somehow. Super Hulk strength. His one-to-one safety companion came running down the hallway past the nursing station yelling, "Call security! Call security!" And here comes this guy butt naked. Blood flying everywhere because he ripped his IVs out. Carrying an IV pole above his head. Security took him down. We sedated him. And basically intubated him on the floor of the unit. An elderly lady, maybe 100 pounds soaking wet, had severely low oxygen levels. We didn't have ventilators available. COVID. And the doctors were trying to delay intubating her as long as they could. Supporting her respiratory system with a non-invasive BiPAP machine. She was so confused from her messed up blood gases. She busted out of restraints. Picked up a chair in her room. Threw it at the window. Shattered it. And tried to jump out the window from the 9th floor. We had to bear hug her and bring her down to the floor. She was intubated. We had to manually bag her while someone drove to a sister hospital. Picked up a ventilator. And brought it for her. Patient who was shot in the abdomen was refusing an NG tube for decompression of his stomach. Tube goes through your nose into your stomach. Hooked up to intermittent suction to keep stomach acid and gas from passing into your bowels. Without it, if you have an obstruction or ileus, your abdomen swells in size and things like surgical incisions can rip open. Well, he was completely refusing it and we warning him his incision would rip open. Sure enough, it eventually did. His intestines spilled out onto his lap and he just sat there poking them. Completely fascinated he was seeing his own intestines. I had to tell him to stop touching them and he said, "Why?" And my response was, "They live inside of you because they're not meant to be touched. Stop touching them." He was rushed to the OR. I was brought to the by ambulance. While I was waiting for a room, another patient was extremely drunk and waiting for a bed nearby. He asked the EMT if he could vape in the hospital and they told him he couldn't. He proceeded to pull out a vape and try anyways. The hospital staff took it away from him. After about 5 minutes, and when he seemed sure that nobody was looking, he pulled out another vape and tried to take a hit. It was quickly confiscated by hospital staff. A rogue, wandering cat behind the counter of the closed for the evening hospital shop. There's a set of shelves built into the wall behind the counter that's full of teddy bears and other soft toys, presumably to be bought when visiting a patient. And the cat was asleep amongst the toys. Thank you guys so much for watching. What subreddit or post should I do next? Leave a comment below.